Well, welcome back to It's an Inside Job podcast. I'm your host, Jason Lim. Now, this podcast is dedicated to helping you to help yourself and others to become more mentally and emotionally resilient so you can be better at bouncing back from life's inevitable setbacks. Now, on It's an Inside Job, we decode the science and stories of resilience into practical advice, skills, and strategies that you can use to impact your life and those around you. Now, with that said, let's slip into the stream. Well, welcome back to the show and a fresh new week. Thank you for allowing me to be part of your week. I have both a brilliant and fascinating guest lined up for you guys today. Her name is Annicken R. She's the pioneer in the field of culture strategy. She's dedicated to transforming the way companies approach their organizational culture. With over 2 decades of experience as Chief Culture Officer for Tandberg, Cultural Strategist for Cisco, and founder and CEO of Corporate Spring, she's trained and inspired thousands of leaders and teams worldwide on how to build thriving and high-performing cultures that foster creativity and joy. Her expertise is being recognized by Adam Grant, Wharton professor and #1 New York Times bestselling author of Think Again, who called her a gifted transformation specialist. She and her team have developed the science-based Corporate Spring model, which has led to greater levels of engagement, retention, and business performance for their global clients. Her latest venture, Happy Life, Happy Work, offers inspiring online courses and live sessions that help individuals create more happiness, joy, and success in their personal and professional lives. Well, her accolades do not end there. Annicken is also the author of the best-selling debut novel, Fly Butterfly, which is an inspiring personal and professional metamorphosis story inspired by her own transformational journey. Well, let's now slip into the stream and meet Annicken R. Well, today I would like to say a big hello and thank you to Annicken R. for showing up on It's an Inside Job. Hello, Annicken.
Hi, Jason.
I was wondering, maybe for our listeners, and many Norwegian listeners will recognize the name and know who you are, but for our international listeners, could you maybe introduce who you are and what you're about?
Yes, I will be happy to. I'm born and bred Norwegian. I have always been really passionate about, finding ways to be happy and live happy lives. Already as a little child, when people ask me what I want to be when I grew up, I said I wanted to be happy. So that was the reply. And funny enough, I made that my career to help people find happiness in their lives, and even more, or as important, at work. Mm-hmm. So already in my early 20s, when I was traveling around Europe, I realized that like leadership and management, that was something, well, most people maybe didn't see as a job in itself, and how much it influenced the people who worked for them, the way they led. So I decided that I wanted to be a leader. I was in my early 20s. So that was or actually I said, I want to be a boss, because that's the kind of word we used in the 90s. And then I went to university in Stockholm and I learned that, no, I don't want to be a boss. I want to be a leader. So that started my whole career and trajectory as like a person very invested in happiness, but also wanted to do it through leadership. So I went after university, worked as a leader for quite a few years, and realized that my whole philosophy of making people happy at work was really good for business. And I saw how my teams were thriving. And I was a sales leader. I had the best sales team, not because I was so good at selling, but I was good at making people happy and making them feel proud and making them feel engaged and enjoy the jobs. So this was kind of became my specialty. And then in 2000, I was lucky to be hired as a chief culture officer for a company called Tandberg, which was a video conferencing company. At the time you and I, we are seeing each other right now, but at that time in 2002, this was science fiction. So I was able to be part of this amazing entrepreneurial innovation technology company. and build that from, we were 300 when I joined till we were 2,000 people, and we were acquired by Cisco, big corporate Cisco. And then I joined Cisco for a couple of years until I decided that I want to do my own thing. I realized that, how to build happiness, how to build inspired, engaged cultures. There was actually a recipe for that. There was a way to do that. And I had kind of developed it in Tandberg. I tested it in Cisco. And then I said, okay, I want to go out and share this with others as well. So 10 years ago, my company, Corporate Spring, was born. So I left the corporate world. I started my own company, Corporate Spring. And while I was first at it, I decided that, okay, I'm going to, move the country as well. So I sold my house at Chassimokosha and moved to London. And then you and I met in London. I had a fun meeting there, I remember. And then I just continued traveling. And then I went from London and then I moved to Los Angeles. And I've been living in Los Angeles for the last years and building my business, writing my books, enjoying life. And now I'm on to a new adventure.
And, the reason I wanted to have you, Annicken, I guess, as you said, we met about 10 years ago, and that was we shared the stage at a TED Talk in Oslo. And that's where I was kind of inspired by a lot of what you had to say. And, I've been following your posts through LinkedIn over the years, and I've seen how you've contributed to the ecosystem on just that corporate and its happiness and joy, but it's not sort of a superficial. This is grounded in science. This is grounded in practice and experience. And that's what I like to bring on the show, people of your caliber who can speak to this, not just sort of the superficial, but sort of the nuts and bolts of what makes us move forward, even in times of struggle, in adversity and such, and how we move through that. It's never an easy journey, but sometimes it gets easier through experience. And so you started Corporate Spring. Maybe we could start there. What is the goal of, I know you've highlighted a little bit, but what is the major goal or the values that drive Corporate Spring? And maybe you could elaborate a little more about what your company does and what it strives for. Absolutely.
So all research shows that people who are highly engaged are much more productive. If you want to have a team that is innovative and creative and high performing, you have to invest in how they are feeling about their jobs, because people who are engaged, are inspired, are happy, they will also collaborate better. They feel much more safe in their environment. So they will, be able to, be creative. They're not afraid of making mistakes. You talk about, psychological safety. There's so many elements that's important for that. But if you really look at it, it's how they're feeling, that they're feeling good. They're feeling safe. They're feeling engaged. But a lot of people and a lot of companies struggle with that because that's emotions, right? So it's easy to say, oh, we're going to have a high performing organization and we're going to measure people and we're going to do this and we're going to tell them that. But that doesn't really work. And all research shows that people need to really want to do it. It needs to come from their inside, that they need to feel inspired. So what I wanted to do when I started Corporate Spring is to bring this knowledge out to businesses and to leaders to help them understand that if you want to be successful with your business, you need to start with the human side of your business. You have to work with your people. You have to, inspire them. And the leadership is not about, as I said earlier, not being a boss and deciding. It's about helping people and helping them grow and inspire them and just show direction, but not being a controlling force for them. So for me, the beginning of Corporate Spring, it was much more seeing that a lot of people didn't have the knowledge of that this was important. Now I'm seeing more and more leaders are actually starting to acknowledge that, but still very many are struggling. How do we do this in practice? So these are the companies that we work with. Is it the companies and the leaders who get this, who understand, my people, I can't do this without my people. I can't do that without them being engaged and inspired and wanting to work here. But how can I, as a leader, show up? What do I need to do in order to create this kind of culture and this kind of environment? So we guide leaders, we guide entire teams and organizations around how do you build these kind of cultures, and we take them through a very specific process, which is capturing what we call the corporate spring model, which is basically 5 building blocks. And the 5 building blocks, the first one is purpose. So in order to be a high-performing organization, you need to have a purpose. You need to understand why you come to work in the morning, what you're here to achieve, right? And surprisingly many, even like executives, struggle with articulating, why do you exist? What's the purpose? So that's usually where we start, like helping them, okay, what are you here to do? What's your purpose? The second one, the second building block, that is to have a clear identity, which do you typically talk about values? What do you stand for? What do you believe in? What is your values? What unifies you as a group? And that's where you start creating this sense of belonging, that everyone, yeah, this is us. This is who we are. And the third building block, and this we call these, if you think about this as it's a triangle, right? So you have the 3 bottom building blocks. The third bottom building block is trust. And psychological safety is a word that is used a lot now. Basically, it is about coming to work and feeling safe and feeling you can be yourself and feeling you can voice your opinion without being afraid of being punished, that kind of environment. But also trusting each other in general on a day-to-day basis, having a trusting environment. So you see how much effective you are when you don't have to spend your energy on looking over your shoulder or covering your back, which unfortunately is very normal in many companies, that people are so afraid of making mistakes that they're doing as little as they can, because that's the safest way to not make a mistake, right? So that's the 3 building blocks. And then if you take it one step further, and then we come into very much where I know that both your passion and your expertise is, Jason, that is mindsets. So the 4th building block is what we call growth mindsets. And the growth mindset is actually 3 different mindsets. One is, we say that if you have these mindsets, you can turn them into abilities. So you have change ability, you have response ability, and you have growth ability. So mindsets is so fascinating, as you know, you're the master here. What's so amazing about mindset, and I see that again and again when I work with groups, is that mindsets, people can really almost in an instant, when they become aware of that their mindset is a choice, that can just shift things so quickly. And when you're able to do that on a collective basis, you have a whole group that decides they want to shift a mindset together. Yes, we want to think like that and hold each other accountable and coach each other on that mindset. It's extremely powerful, and it can really transform not only teams and organizations, but individuals and individual lives, because they can actually realize that, oh, wow, I never realized I actually had a choice, right? So that is the 4th building block. And the 5th building block of the corporate spring model, that is passion and joy. So what we talk about is in order for people to be engaged and feel passion and joy, you have to have these other ones in place first, right? So it is a process, right? But passion and joy, that is the ultimate. And that's when you look at when teams and organizations reach to the level that people are passionate and joyful, like at work, they are deliver up to 50% better performance than those who are not. They have 30% less sick leave. They have 50% higher retention. They have better innovation. They have even 3 times higher shareholder revenue. So it's just a shareholder return. So there's so many proof of how beneficial getting a team to this place is for business. And this is one of the things I'm really passionate about, and making people aware of that. Like when you start working on these elements, the outcome is something you can't demand or even ask for. You have to create it from the bottom up and make everyone part of building that kind of culture.
Well, it definitely takes investment. I think what you're talking about, this has become even more pertinent and salient, especially after the pandemic, is when the pandemic landed, nobody, or at least 99.9% of the population, didn't really see this coming. It hit us, and everything that we took for granted, it was wiped out because of lockdowns, because of, isolation, whatever it is. And we didn't know what this pandemic was, and that closed everything down. And we literally became tourists in our own lives, meaning that we started appreciating all the things that we took for granted. And what was maybe, management speak, high performance teams and trust. Yeah, I get it. But you know what? Once we were isolated and shut down for 24 months, that took a toll on not just the individual psyche, but collective psyches, even at a national level across the globe. And all these things you talk about, these 5 blocks of purpose and identity and trust, mindset, passion, and joy, these aren't just trivial management speak terms that we can just bandy about. They have true significance in our sort of psychological stability and soundness as a group or as individuals. And I think what this pyramid or this triangle that you speak of is it is a model of resilience, because in order to have passion, joy, or any of that, you need to have a sense of purpose, a sense of direction, and a clear identity as to what your values are. And like when times get tough, like adversity shows up or challenges show up on our doorstep uninvited, then if we know clearly what our values are, then they can set guide rails, as I understand what you're speaking about, to help us lead us through a storm or through a foggy night.
Yes.
And when you can do that as a collective, as a team, as a what have you, as a group, then the trust is there, and that psychological soundness or safety, as it's being called more commonly, it's there, and that really resounds with me what you're saying. So have you seen a shift that companies are taking this even more seriously than before the pandemic? Or is this just sort of my perception of things?
No, I think you're right that the pandemic was a wake-up call for many. And some leaders actually were forced to start caring. And it was from not maybe being the top priority to ask people, how are you and how are things doing? How are you doing? I think more and more leaders realize they actually have to check in with my people. I actually have to care. And then they started caring. And I hear many teams actually are seeing that the shift of leadership has happened because it brought people closer together. We all went through this together. We had a traumatic experience together, and we can talk about that. So that is the good side of the story. Then you have, unfortunately, lots of examples like things going back to normal, just like, okay, that happened, that's done. Now we go back to how things were exactly the way before. And that doesn't work, because people have changed. People have changed through this experience, and people have other expectations now. So we are starting to see more, I think, like uproar from employees who say like, no, this is not okay, and some people say, I actually preferred my leader during the pandemic, or it was better when it was okay to work from home. A lot of people now being, forced back into the office, and have felt, especially in the US, where, I've been working with some teams that said that we didn't even know what that was like. They had never worked remote in their entire life. And they're like, I don't want to go back to that life again. So people are leaving. Especially in the US, there's been a lot of return of people because, if they're forced to go back to the office, they say, no, I won't. And then they find another job instead. So there is a shift. And like typically when we go through crisis, that opportunity for change, right? So I think some have taken that opportunity and made some changes, and it's working well from them. And then you have some who just kind of close their eyes and ears and all that and say, no, that was just, that's never going to happen again. And now it's over. Now everything is normal, but it's not. So I think there's a greater level of awareness about the human side and how that influences everything. But I still think we have a huge, long way to go.
Agreed. But I think at the same time, I think people are more cognizant of these 5 blocks as you've encapsulated how important they are for an organization to adapt and be flexible, especially with all the crazy things that are going on in the world right now. Well, it just is. And the question is, this is the reality. And if a company is going to survive or adapt, well, it comes back down to the individual people, right? And how they connect. Talking about transformation, the it was a transformation to go from, post to pandemic to, pre and then to post pandemic. And so that I'd like to just to touch on the book. You wrote a book, Fly Butterfly, which is about personal and professional transformation. And I believe it was based upon your own experiences. I was wondering, could we touch on that a little? And maybe you could speak more to what the message of the book was to the reader?
Yes, I love to speak about that as well.
Okay, great.
So Fly Butterfly, it's a book that the idea came to me actually after I left my corporate job and kind of spread my butterfly wings. And knowing that when you are in a certain environment, as the corporate world typically creates, it's easy to lose yourself sometimes, and you start playing by the rules that's there. And as a woman, that means typically playing by the men's rules. So I knew that I was not the only one who felt like I had done that. I mean, most do that, and it's almost like it's inevitable, to be quite honest, that it is, you play with the environment, or you have to fit into the environment. Of course, I was also very conscious about this in the corporate world. So in bringing the feminine values with me and being that, but you still are very much in a man's world. Like I was in IT, that's 80% men. So I wanted to write a story about, and I made her American, and it's inspired by my own life, but it is still like, it's a lot of fiction as well. So I said it's 1/3 is about me, 1/3 is about people I know, 1/3 is pure fiction. But this woman, she works and climbs up the corporate ladder in corporate America, and very much on the men's rules. So she almost become tougher than them after a while, because she's like, no, she has to be there. So she's losing herself. So I want to tell a story about someone who is losing herself a bit in her role, but not aware of it, because that happens, we get so into it. It's not like we think about we're playing a role. We think we become that after a while, but maybe it doesn't feel as good, in the long run. So this woman, she is in a situation, she's so ambitious, she really want to climb to the top of the pyramid of this company. And then she gets the opportunity to do that. She only needs to do one thing, and that is to go to a conference in Hawaii and go on stage and just tell a lie and just say that the company is going so well. And when you do that, you're saving the company, and you're going to get the corner office overlooking Central Park and this executive title and all that. So she's cool with that. Then she goes to Hawaii because she doesn't think it's just a job, right? It's only business. Yeah, that it's a gray zone. That's what we do because it's business. But then she comes to Hawaii and she goes on that stage and is about to go and speak or say these lies. And then she looks out and there's a group of investors sitting there, and she looks at them and, well, yes, there's investors in suits, but then there's a group of elderly people with, colorful shirts and hats and all that. And they're investing their money in their company. And she realizes by telling a lie, all these people, they might lose their all their
savings, their investments.
Their savings.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just like the build up. The beginning of the book is like her having to look herself like deep into herself while she's standing on stage, like, who do I want to be? Who do I want to be? Because she didn't know anything else than being who she was. But suddenly she realized what I'm about to do now is so wrong. And she couldn't do it. So basically that's her like meltdown. And then the rest, the book, the story, kind of real story starts there. And that is how she finds back to herself, finds back to her values, find a purpose. She gets to know herself, connects with her true self, and she realizes there's different ways you can be, and there's different ways you can live, and there's different ways you can lead. And then she decides to go back into the world and go back to New York and lead from her heart and lead with a purpose and lead with values and just bring this new way of leading back into that world. So that's like her doing corporate spring in practice, kind of, in there. And then there's many dimensions. I'm not going to say how it ends and how it goes.
No, leave that to the reader.
I'll leave that, but
no plot killers here.
No plot killers, but the story. So basically, this is as much as you can read on the back of the book as well. But the point here is that it's very much a transformational journey. But so it starts with her transforming herself, and then she goes out and she transforms the corporate world or her corporation as well. And you know, when you look at leadership and you look at culture and you look at transformation, you know, you hear about, oh, we're going to do culture transformation. So when I talk to a leader and she or he says they want to like help to change the culture, I always ask and of course you are ready to start with changing yourself, because you won't change anything unless you start with yourself. And that's where you have to start. And this story is an example of it. She had to change first before she could change, you know, her environment.
And I see a lot of parallels in that story, what you do. And a lot of, you know, when I'm talking to resilience to individuals or teams or what have you, it's exactly there. You have to kind of clean your own house before you can go out and sort of sort out everything else. You have to get your thoughts and emotions and your behavior all in alignment, because if there's kind of skewed, then you're all over the place. And, you know, the slightest change or the slightest hiccup in your life is going to derail you. And if you can get your own house in order, if I can use that term, then you're much more robust, much more resilient, you have the tenacity and fortitude to be able to weather the storm, to make it through the adversity. I'm not going to say it's an easy ride, and neither is this character in your book. It's not an easy ride for her. She had to, you know, struggle with her own demons, I guess. She had to have her own wake-up calls in order to come to the place she had to do. But it's going through that gauntlet of adversity that strengthened her. And at some point, I guess she had to become vulnerable to understand, you know, this doesn't really rhyme with me. I do have certain weaknesses or vulnerabilities and certain strengths that I have to take into account in order to make this transformation. Is that what I understand from your perspective of the story and the character?
Yes, very much so.
I always like to ask this of authors. What did you learn about yourself in the process of writing that book?
Oh my goodness, Jason.
Sorry. Hard-hitting questions here.
No, that was, and I don't want people to read it like this, but, you know, I kind of jokingly said it was a little bit of, not a little bit, it was a huge self-therapy in that book. It's kind of like, yeah, you say facing my own demons, like looking at my own things. So I mean, change isn't easy. And I've gone through so many changes in my life and done so many, you know, in many other people's eyes, crazy things. And to do those things, I would have to change again and again and again. And it hurts, you know, it's you have to look yourself sometimes brutally in the eyes, or do you even say that? Well, you have to look at yourself in the eyes and be that brutal voice and say, it's working, or what do you want, or how should I do this? And but for me, it was also very, very healthy, very healing, and fun. I mean, I had so much fun writing. It was like I was laughing and crying and all those things. And it brings in like so many elements of the things that I believe in. So it's not a lot of business elements in it, but it's also kind of it's romantic. You know, there's some romance in there. There's some spirituality in there. It is basically me just like inviting the readers into, I think, what life can look like and what it looks like very much inside my head, but told through a story. Because storytelling is, I think, the best way that we can actually communicate with other people when we feel we have something to say. And I did feel I had something to say with this book.
And so, you know, when I've talked to other authors, when they were writing something, you know, as they said, they went through a roller coaster of emotions, but it was almost a form of journaling. It allowed them to meld or create a confluence between their conscious minds and their unconscious processes. And it's through the written pen or clicking away on a typewriter, sorry, I just aged myself, on a keyboard, you know, they... Whoops. But they found they explored avenues and venues and little niches in themselves that they had never seen before, and that it actually explained a lot of things. It was a very cleansing process for them when they were writing. But it was through the medium of writing, maybe a book or an article or what have you, that they discovered something about themselves. And that actually it was a very therapeutic process of writing a book, because one thing is writing an article, that's whatever, 2,000 words, but a book can be up to 200-300 pages, right? If longer. And there's the whole process of doing that. And this is something you found for yourself. It was quite cathartic, quite therapeutic for yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I loved it. And if people ask me, I ask people, when are you at your happiest? What you're most passionate about, what makes your heart sing? Writing will always be my answer to that, because I just go into this zone and I just disappear from the rest of the world. I'm just so happy. And people like being around me when I'm writing, because I'm the happiest person alive. But that's all I wanted to think about. So I get tired of it after a while, and I want to talk about it. So it's you kind of go into that zone, and I honestly felt like I was almost like channeling things that didn't really come from me either. It's just like characters and stories and things they said that I was like, oh, I needed to read this, right? So I was writing what I needed to read. So I didn't even understand the depth of it while I was writing it. And then afterwards, when I read it, it was like, oh my goodness, like, wow, yeah. So it is a very interesting experience. So I just started, or not just started, I've been working on it for a little while, my second book, which is a sequel to that. So we will continue following Maya Williams on her next endeavor. So that's I'm very happy to do that.
When can we expect the release of that?
I did tell my publisher 2023, but now I haven't told them yet. But 2024, I think, is more.
That's just around the block. It's already, we're halfway through the year, so.
I know. So so my goal is in 2024. It will be out.
Great. Looking forward to that. I've had the great privilege of knowing Annicken for a number of years, all the way back in 2012 when we met on that stage at TEDx in Oslo. Her passion, her motivation, the way she speaks is so inspiring. But what's very important for me, which I always thought she was a solid player when she's speaking to happiness, joy, and feeling satisfied at work, is that it's all science-based. It's pragmatic and it's practical, and she speaks from experience and deep knowledge. And that is clearly evident, as you heard in the first part of this conversation. Her company, Corporate Spring, has a process, and as she said, it's built on 5 building blocks. There's the purpose, understanding why we show up to work. 2, it's having a clear identity, understanding values and what unifies us as a group. And the 3rd, which is so important, is trust. It's that psychological safety that binds and is the cohesive unit amongst us human beings, as a team, as a group, as a company. The 4th is a growth mindset. And as she says, it's taking the mindset and then shifting it to abilities. And there's 3 abilities she speaks to: change, response, and growth. And then finally, if you get all that in place, then you have a workplace, you have an environment where passion and joy flourishes. And her best-selling book, Fly Butterfly, is an embodiment of that practice, of that 5-step process, which I highly recommend picking up. It's a brilliant read. As we shift into the second part of the conversation, it becomes a little deeper, it becomes a little more profound, because we talk about Annicken's journey through cancer, from diagnosis to surgery to treatment, and then coming out on the other end. And although she has always lived the values that she speaks about at Corporate Spring, well, this is a whole different level of taking that knowledge and that experience and that wisdom that she's carried with her all this time, and to actively employ it at even a greater level, as she was on her road to recovery from diagnosis of cancer. And so I hope you enjoy the second part of the conversation with Annicken Day. So now let's slip back into the stream. The reason I also wanted to reach out to you, Annicken, a while back you had posted that you had made a full recovery from cancer. Now, I don't want this conversation to be defined by that event in your life. It is one event in your life. But I was wondering, to the extent you would like to share, what did you learn about yourself going through such a ride?
Wow. So I've heard about people getting cancer and or some kind of like disease, like life-threatening disease, and hearing how they, change their lives and do things and all that. So, and I was thinking, like, if that happens to me, what would I do? I mean, I already changed my life so many times. I already, I have really, and I've been living a life which has been challenging, a lot of the traditional ways of doing things. And I've been living around the world and doing stuff. So I was like, is that really going to happen to me? But I have to say it did. I mean, it was almost like things were just like, became so crystal clear suddenly. And it started with getting when I got the diagnosis first, I didn't believe it because I know I've never been sick. I haven't been to a hospital. I haven't even seen a doctor. I was like, my dad was a doctor. So, doctors' kids, we don't get sick because we're not allowed to get sick. So I wasn't like, and so when I got the diagnosis, I was like, are you sure? You sure you didn't make a mistake here? Because I don't think I have that. That was like a little bit like my brother, who's also a doctor. He's like, Annicken, it does sound you're a little bit in denial there. It's like, yeah, I know I got the diagnosis, but I wasn't so sure. I have to do another test. Yeah, so that's kind of how it started. And then I was so lucky because it was found early, and after 2 weeks of kind of living in a lot of fear, I was told that this is we can remove this and you will be fine, and I wouldn't have to go to chemo but just do radiation and all that. So after that, I was just mostly grateful, just grateful that it wasn't worse, because I know how bad it can be. I lost both my parents to cancer, so I know what that disease looks like. Yeah, so after and going through that, it became very much almost like a project for me. Going through this and doing that. So while I was in it, I didn't I don't know if like how much happened really while I was in it, but I think what happened was when I was finished. So again, lucky only having it for 7 months from diagnosed till I had my final radiation therapy. But then something happened to me, and I didn't even like had this huge emotional reaction. I didn't even cry, It's like, no, we're going to handle this, until it was finished. And then I just cried my heart out, because like that relief, okay, I'm finished. I survived. I'm okay, and then I just couldn't stop. And then it was almost like things just got so clear to me about like, okay, wow, I got this second chance. I mean, it could have been bad. It could have not found it. This could have been the end, but it's not. It's a new beginning. And what do I want my life to be like? What matters to me? What do I want? And then I was like, okay, I'm not going to postpone anything for the rest of my life. I'm not going to be like, one day I'm going to do this, or I'm not going to waste any energy on things that's not important. I'm just not going to do that. I'm going to like adapt to other people or try to fit into other people's expectations of me. No, I'm just going to go out there and be me, because like I got this one life. I'm going to live it so hard and so authentically and so truthfully that if this comes back one day, I would have zero regrets. That's the only thing I knew for sure. There's going to be zero regrets. So yeah, I spoke this language before and I believed in these things before, but now I'm doing it. I think that's the big difference. I'm just doing it.
And there's a little I'd like to explore there, because I think sometimes, sharing stories such as yours, it became a wake up call for you. And that's in that blaring light of what had happened to you, it fundamentally shifted how you approached life, right? It was no longer waiting for things. You just said, you know what, let's do it. Let's execute on this and just do what I want to do. But hopefully not all of us have to go through such a significant wake-up call. And I think, someone such as your caliber, sharing your vulnerabilities of what happened to you, hopefully that becomes a wake-up call that we can learn from other people's experiences, where we don't have to have such a hard hit to make that shift. And sometimes, hopefully, that resonates to someone. If we could rewind back, you said you had 14 days of just sort of fear and worry and apprehension and such. There may be a listener right now, he or she may be going through a similar diagnosis, or they're dealing with something that's incredibly overwhelming.
Mm.
What did you specifically do? And that may have been just sort of, you've learned it through experience, but what did you do to push through the fear, to move forward to the next day and not fall into complete despair?
Mm. So, what was interesting when this happened, like, I think I had maybe half a day of like total panic, just thinking, remembering my parents, what happened to them, thinking about how I'm going to tell my daughter, prepare her, like all the worst, like the worst case scenarios, like all the horrible things. I even think I started thinking about my funeral. But then it was something, it was almost like a little like voice in my head that just reminded me of what I have always been teaching others. And that is, there's a lot of things that we can't control out around us in the world and what happens to us. Actually, there's just like one thing that we can control in our lives, and that is how we respond to situations. How do we respond? And as I kind of remember that, I'm like, okay, so this is happening. Can I do something about it? No, I can't. Can I influence it? The outcome? Can I do? No, not really. What can I do something about? Okay, I can think about how will I respond to this? And something, shifted in me in that moment, because I was like, okay, so I've been sitting here now half the day and telling myself worst case scenario, so how everything can go bad. Let's just like flip that script and start talking about best case scenarios. Okay, so then I started, okay, Annicken, what's going to happen now? Well, they're going to tell me this is not dangerous. They're going to tell me they can remove it. So I just started telling me that story instead. It's almost like I was reading this book. It was like horror, or watching a movie. I was watching a horror movie, and then I just like turned it around. Like, you know what? My life is not a horror movie. Maybe a thriller sometimes, but most of all, it's a romantic comedy. So let's just like flip the script, make it a romantic.
Anniken's rom-com.
And so Annicken, she gets this horrible message, and she just, yes, and she cries or like get paralyzed. I didn't even cry. I just got like cold and paralyzed, like just sitting there staring. And then I was like, no, I'm just going to like do that. But I have to tell you this, Jason, and I know this is for many a little bit controversial because they disagree with that. And some people were not happy with me afterwards. But I chose to not tell anyone. I had one friend who I told. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to talk to anyone before I know like what the doctor says, because everyone else also going to play those horror movies or that, right? And I can't handle that. I need to now live in my version of the story until I know. And that's going to be like a story with a good end. So I just kept on telling myself that story. And that's how I came through. So I had people around me, they didn't even notice it. And because I was able to convince myself so much about this was just going to be fine. This was just like a bump in the road, a hiccup. Yeah, it's going to be tough, but I knew I could do it. And it's just like, that's every time I just felt like almost I want to go down in a little like black hole. I pulled myself up again and said, no, but that's not how it's going to be. It's going to be okay. You're going to be fine. And I even told myself, on the other side of this, you're actually going to be grateful for this experience because it's going to teach you something. So that's kind of what I decided to do and to focus on. And I'm not saying it was easy and all the time, but for me doing this, having this self-talk and telling myself those stories, that's what kind of got me through those 2 weeks. And then when I met the doctor and I did learn that it was okay, I was so grateful that I actually, the best case scenario turned out to be the reality. And then I could tell people, and I could tell them, hey, this happened, I got this, but it's going to be okay. So no one else had to go into that black hole with me, really. And for me, again, personally, it's easier to be there alone than to have other people needs around them. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just like that was how I handled it, and it did kind of work. Yeah, I felt it did work well for me.
Yeah, what I hear is almost a 3-step process, if I may be so bold to simplify this a little. First was self-awareness. You became self-aware as to the story you were telling yourself and how it wasn't really working for you. So you decided to change up the script, from a horror story to a rom-com to slash thriller. And, self-awareness is so important. It's about what we're thinking, what we're feeling, and what we're doing. I think also what you did was you showed self-compassion. You turned on the self-compassion, thinking, you know what, there's no point in playing this to, seeing a gravestone or a tombstone in the graveyard. How is that helping me? And so you turned on the compassion. And what I hear is that you're saying to yourself, okay, you'll either succeed or you'll learn from this. At the end of this, when you reach that safe harbor, which was 7 months, you didn't know that, but once you reach that safe harbor, there's going to be a learning lesson from this. And for me, that is quintessentially the definition of self-compassion, to learn, right? So any situation you move into, you either succeed or you learn from it. That's pretty much it. And then what I also heard was the self-efficacy where you decided to take some sort of control, to take ownership. You could choose how you want to play this out, in the sense in your head. You could choose how you're going to invest your attention and the dividends from how you invested your attention. So those are kind of the 3 things that I saw, or what I heard you kind of explaining to me right now. And so here we are, middle of 2023, you're healthy, you're living in Tuscany, you're living the life, you're executing on what you want to do. And if we can move on to the Annicken Day story here, you've also started something, I think it's maybe a permutation of Corporate Spring, Happy Life, Happy Work, where you focus on happiness, joy, and success in an online format. I was wondering, could you speak a little to that?
Yes, I would love to do that, because one of the things that I've experienced, having worked with corporates and worked with leaders through all these years, is that, it's to think that we are either or, like, oh, you're one person at work and one person, privately. I mean, we are the same people. We might be playing roles, some playing them better than others, but still, we are the same people. And a lot of the people that has been through our programs and our trainings and all that have said that they use so much of what they learn in their private lives as well. And it really have shifted and changed and improved their private lives. And some people said, hey, I'd love to learn this growth mindset thing and, how to respond to all that. I love my wife or my husband to learn the same. Sometimes I get that, or like, I think this would be really healthy for my kid. So I just got so many feedback. So I've been thinking about for actually quite a few years that I would like to do something that is directed to the individual, like not corporate and not business, but like the individual. But because our work life plays such a big part of our lives, I don't look at it too separate. I look at it, how can we create a really good life for ourselves and to align work life with that? So, it kind of starts with having a happy life, and then find a way to use your strengths and your passion and bring that to work and to your work life. So we started, it's almost a year ago now that I decided, okay, let's do this now. And how do we reach people? Well, of course, online is the way.
It is.
So I developed a program. It's based on the same model as Corporate Spring. So you think about Corporate Spring model, you have the purpose for the business or the team and the values and all that. But we do it on the personal. So what's your personal purpose? What were you put on this planet to do? Why? What's your big why? Right? And then we talk about personal values. Who are you? What you stand for? What do you believe in? Even ask them, how would you want to be remembered? And then we talk about self-trust, how to trust yourself and trust your inner guidance, trust your own voice, and learn to live without fear. I think fear is something that is just hindering so many people in pursuing and living the kind of lives that they're capable of and want to live. But things are holding you back. And very often that fear voice comes from yourself, right? It's like that voice that keeps on telling you that this is scary and you're going to fail and you can't make it. So how do you build, and that's resilience. How do you build that resilience? And it starts with like really believing in yourself. And then we go to the growth mindsets and we talk about the growth abilities. How can you learn to change, have the ability to change, the ability to respond, the ability to grow? And I had no idea that this was going to happen to me when I started this whole initiative. But I have to say that like I used this myself, this model when I kind of got lost. I was like, okay, so what am I teaching again? Oh yeah, I'm teaching this. Okay.
Yeah, this is being trial tested, in the most extreme things of your life, as you've just explained. So yes, folks, take this on.
Yeah, so no, it is really amazing because like sometimes you just need some hooks to hang things on, right? Because like things can be so confusing and overwhelming, and you don't see you don't see the forest for the tree. Yes. You're just like in the middle of it, and everything's confusing. But when you take one step aside, you can see where you're at and see what you need. And that's what I want to provide people with, like some guidance, like what do you do? Where do you start? How do you go about to create this kind of life you really want for yourself? Not the life others want for you, the life you want. And how can we do that? So this is it's an online program where you kind of are taken through, you learn about this, but you're taken through like meditative self-reflection exercises. And some people say they never ask themselves these kind of questions before. But then also, how do you align it with work? So there's a whole module around like, so now you know your purpose, now you know your values. How can you align that with the work you have? Or if you don't have a job right now, how can you make sure that the next job fits with who you are and what you believe in and all that? And then we're going to have every second month, we have happy hour live sessions where we talk about these kind of things. So I also want
group therapy.
Group, yeah. So
that's good.
It's and telling stories and all that. And I mean, my cancer story is not part of the program, but I mean, I know, it's so many people go through similar things. So I don't want it to be like happy, or it's not about that. It's like, how do we find happiness in the face of challenges, right? When things feel hopeless, can we still find joy? Because one of the things I think I really, my takeaway from this is like, you know what, happiness and cancer can coexist. I was happy most of the time. I mean, those 7 months, it sounds like, oh, you went through this, like you put that in like a period of a life that must have been horrible. It wasn't horrible. I mean, okay, it was tough when I had surgery and, it hurt and it was tough those 2 weeks before I knew, but most of the times I lived a very good life those 7 months. And I think that's so important to just like find joy and find happiness and look for all the good things. I have so many good things in my life and just like, I need to focus on that. And when I do, it's easier for me to be happy. And then, oh, okay, here's a problem. Here's a little thing. That's annoyance. But hey, overall, that's just like details. And then, of course, I wouldn't say cancer is a detail in any way, but you can still not let it consume you, but like kind of also look at it like, okay, it's just something I have to go through. And it could be other things as well, like anything in your life, basically. You just like can sometimes look at it like, okay, this is tough, but I have to go through it. I will get through it. And in the meantime, I'm actually going to also make sure I'm having a good time with whatever I can have a good time with.
I think that's so important because what I hear is you're using a cognitive technique called compartmentalization, where, you reduce it down to the granular. You're not looking at this one global thing that's hit me. It's granular. There was 2 weeks of the fear. There was the few hours of surgery. There was a few hours of recovery. There was the treatments. But going through that process, when you compartmentalize it, there's something called systematic desensitization, meaning that we get used to things after a while. We just get used to it, right? I have the treatment in 3 weeks. I go to it. And once the first time is probably pretty hard. At least that's what I've heard. But then the second time, you know what to expect. The brain has a map, has a cognitive layout of what's going on. And that creates a sense of certainty. That creates a sense of agency, right? That I have an idea and I control the situation. And this other, coming back to your online course, Happy Life, Happy Work, for me, it sounds like a very thorough process to help someone to reframe. And you mentioned something about fear. The way I've always looked at fear, Annicken, is I've seen it as it's uncomfortable as hell, but for me, it's always been, it points to a direction of where I need to develop. If I fear something, that's what I need to develop. I need to develop the fortitude or the tenacity or the courage or the strength to face what that is, right? I don't have to go, full throttle into it. I can just slowly kind of walk into the cold water there, kind of get used to the water, So I think a lot of this, of the reframing, what you've gone through and the course, I think it sounds like a really good process if someone's looking to shake things up in their life without going through some sort of crisis, unfortunately, as you had to go through. But maybe this is a more delicate wake-up call for someone.
Yes, and thank you for saying that, because that's some of the feedbacks that I have received. Is like, and someone who knows me said like, oh, thank you for not letting me, thank you for giving me the wake-up call before, whatever had to happen. Because I think that when you do take time for yourself, and a lot of people never do that, but if you do take time to yourself and you do start to ask yourself some questions that you might be surprised of your answers, because that's what I also heard. Like, for example, there's one exercise where I ask people to envision that they're on their 85-year birthday, and they're coming to this beautiful dinner and invited, and they come there and everyone they love and everything is there and they're celebrating you and all that. And then you sit down and there's light in the trees and you get this drink and you just sit down and this is your day. This is your big day. We're here to honor and celebrate you. And there's 5 people who's going to come there and they're going to thank you. They're going to give you their thanks for what you have done, what the difference you've done in their lives. And first is like more obvious people is like your spouse or your friends or your kids and your neighbors and your colleagues and all that. And then the last one is there's someone there and you're just surprised that person is even there. And the person stands up and want to give you a speech. And the speech is to talk about what a difference you made in their lives. And this is a person you weren't even aware you had done anything amazing for, right? And then basically you sit down and you write down the words, and that's kind of how you start finding your values. Like, these are the things I want people to say about me. This is how I want to be remembered. This is what is important to me, because since you appreciate other people saying it to you, it's what's important to you. And some people have come back to me and say that, they were so shocked to realize like the things I actually wanted people to say to them, that's not what they did. That's not how they showed up. And it's like, I want to be remembered for something I'm not. And that was such and others say, okay, so there can be tweaks and all that. But I think that's just having that honest conversation with yourself. It's such a valuable thing to do. And earlier the better. I had a 25-year-old doing it, and she was grateful and said, like, thank you for now. Like, I have time. I had a 60-year-old who did the same. It's like, oh, I wish I'd done it earlier, but hey, I still got 40 more years.
At least you're doing it now, right? Exactly.
Yeah. So,
well, because what I hear is, the way going through that sort of mental exercise, it's a very unique way to actually awaken your attention. We were talking about before how you can focus your attention on what you want to control and not all the horror stories, right? You want to talk about the rom-com or the thriller. And I think this is a very important way. It's to shift and to understand where we can cognizantly shift our attention to get those good dividends, right? That can fill us. Because I've talked about this a number of times in the podcast, but the brain is based on a negativity bias. It does that for survival purposes. It looks for threats and hazards. And when we are mentally worn down and we are not in a good mindset, our attention never runs out, but it goes down dark alleys where we don't want to usually go down there. And when we are in the right state of mind, we would never travel down there. We would never transverse those dark roads, but sometimes we do. And so I think one practice that I talk a lot about is trying to be grateful of things, but not just sort of general grateful. Oh, I'm grateful for my cats or my house or my dog or my kids. That's great. Don't get me wrong with that. But the practice I tell people when they're in a negative state, and it's to fire off different networks in their brain, is think about your day. At the end of the day, when you're calling it a day and you're about to hit the sheets, think about 3 unique things that happened to you that really stood out and had in a positive or optimistic light, whatever that may be. Because what that does, that counterbalances the negativity bias. And it, as just as you said so eloquently, it allowed you to focus your attention where you wanted to do it. And where attention flows, that's where our thinking goes. And it triggers this pharmacy in our head. It releases dopamine and serotonin and all these kind of good neuromodulators and transmitters in us. And that's all triggered by where we put our attention, because our attention triggers thoughts, which trigger emotions, which trigger this chemical cascade. And at the end of the day, that chemical cascade, well, that's what we call emotions, because emotions are not good or bad. They're just a spectrum of emotions. And those emotions are just the way our physiology communicates to our psychology. And as you said, you can choose what you want to do. And what I hear is, I hear this woman in front of me, Annicken R, saying, I have this emotion, but I see it as information. It's not instructions, but I can choose what I want to do with that information and then go down the road of my choosing. And so that really resonates with me when you say that exercise when you're 85 and you're standing up at that podium talking to everyone you've influenced and how you've contributed, but that one unique person, because that speaks to being grateful in a very, I guess, unorthodox way, because you generally don't think about that one person, like, what are you doing here? Kind of thing. So I just wanted to comment. I just want to put a little cap on that because I really like that exercise.
Yeah, I love the way you put it and how you can explain everything from such a scientific and brain point of view. It sounds, I'm happy you're saying that, because I think it's, you said about the information and that we have the choice on what we do and how it influences emotions and how it influences action. So I see that again and again, where we put attentions. I mean, it eventually becomes our action. It becomes our reality. So I usually say we can, most people don't understand how much we can influence our reality by starting to think, to think about it. So the intention becomes a reality because of, all the actions that follow. And if we don't have a conscious approach to our lives or to our choices or to situations, we're just letting them rule us. We're letting them take over, right?
Well said.
So I think this is, the way of taking control of your emotions, take control of your life, and then whatever reality you want to happen, like the chances that's going to happen it's so much bigger, right? Because that's where you put your intention. So
I'm just very respectful of your time. You said I take a conscious approach. And conscious approach means you need to be sort of present in the here and now, and to understand, just to be present and not lose yourself in the future, the past. May I ask, what specific skills or techniques or things do you do to help yourself make yourself self-aware? Like right now I'm asking you, so that's one way of being self-aware. What are you thinking, feeling, doing? But when you're alone with yourself in a beautiful countryside like Tuscany, but when you are in a good state or a bad state, how do you make yourself self-aware?
I found the easiest, most effective method, sorry, there is sometimes just taking some deep breaths. Because what I feel is like when I kind of lose myself a bit, or I lose my mind, it sounds crazy, but it's just like I lose focus. It's very often that I just don't take, it's almost like I don't get enough oxygen to my brain. So sometimes just like taking some deep breaths, it's almost like landing back in myself again. Then I was like, okay, and again, what are you going to do now? What's the situation? How are you going to handle this? Just like having a little bit of self-talk, but it has to start with that deep breath. So, and that's actually something I write about in my book as well, because Maya in the book, she forgets to breathe, and she's actually, she gets all these symptoms, and she goes to a doctor who says she needs to more oxygen, and she asks if there's something called oxygen pill, because she just wants to a quick and then they say, well, you just have to learn to start to chill. And I'm actually pretty good. I'm pretty good at chilling, and I know when I need it, because that's when my brain got a little bit frantic. I find it hard to focus. I have to take deep breaths, and I just have to a little time out. Sometimes it can just be 10 minutes. Sometimes it's a couple of days, but just allowing yourself to that. And that's like what the self-talk is, because if you don't breathe, if you don't have enough oxygen in your brain, that self-talk can be destructive. You can start telling yourself bad stories, right?
So and it's not to believe everything your brain spits out, because sometimes it spits out for some really stupid thoughts.
I know. That's what I keep telling it as well. But then it's the other voice, which is like the wise voice that needs a lot of oxygen. So yeah, that's like the quick fix.
Yeah, but I mean, that's good, because I mean, when you feel things building up and then you take deeper breaths, you oxygenate the brain. It's something called embodied cognition, and basically it means to be cognitive of what's going on inside us in a very simplistic way. And if we can be present, if we can read the signals that our body's trying to send to us, like, for example, if you've sprained your ankle, that signal is going to be pretty clear not to go running on that sprained ankle, right? So you take time. But sometimes, mental sprained ankles, if we can call it that, sort of a mental sprain, it will show up as some sort of physical pain, or a sense of heavy shoulders, or headaches, or insomnia, or a rash or something. But if we can pick up those signals, well, that helps us to become more self-aware. And what I talk to a lot of clients sometimes, I say, it doesn't have to always be when you're in a bad state. When you're in a good place or in a neutral place, just stop up for a second and ask yourself a triad of elements. What are you thinking right now? Like, what's the story you're telling yourself, right? It's usually 2 or 3 sentences. That's it. You're telling yourself over and over and over. What are you feeling? What's the emotion you're feeling right now, right? Just check in with it. Again, it's information. It's not instructions. Check in with that. And what are you doing, right? Are you sitting with a stiff back? Are you biting your nails? Are you kicked back with a glass of red wine on a beautiful Tuscany afternoon looking over the landscape? I don't know, whatever. But self-awareness is the trigger to resilience, I think. And everything you've told me, from Corporate Spring to your book, Fly Butterfly, and to your online course, Happy Life, Happy Work, and also your trip through Cancerville, all of it came back to self-awareness, and that helped you build resilience. Annicken, again, I'm very respectful of your time. I was wondering, is there any last tips or advice you could share with our audience?
Wow, I think you said so many wise things, Jason. I think the word self-awareness is like, yes, what it boils down to. I think that is the beginning of everything. I talk about it as leadership, like it starts with self-awareness. I talk about it in relationships. It starts with self-awareness, and it's also the only thing we really can control is how we are feeling, how we are reacting, what we are doing. So yeah, and it's not like, you can just push the self-awareness button. No, it's not that. I think you need to be aware that self-awareness is important, and that's where we can start. So yeah, that would be my kind of ending comment, just basically agreeing with everything you said.
Brilliant, Annicken. Well, I'll make sure I leave all those contact information in the show notes. So I would recommend anyone at an individual or corporate level to reach out to. A corporate level, obviously, Corporate Spring. On an individual level, Annicken Day. Annicken, thank you very much for sharing your story, your vulnerability, your experiences, and what you've learned along this, through your story arc so far.
Oh, thank you so much, Jason. This was actually quite self-therapeutic as well. So appreciate that. Thank you. It's a free therapy session here.
Well, I learned a lot myself. I learned a lot. Thank you again, Annicken.
Thank you.
Well, folks, that was the outstanding Annicken Day, CEO of Corporate Spring and author of the best-selling book, Fly Butterfly, which its sequel, which I'm looking forward to, Annicken, so get it out there in 2024. I had such a brilliant conversation with you, Annicken. You're a vivacious, energetic, and all-around good person. So a big personal thank you to you, Annicken, for spending some time with me today. I very much appreciated your company and hope we can do this again. Well, folks, if you are interested in getting in contact with Annicken Day, Corporate Spring, or just picking up that good read, Fly Butterfly, I will leave all the contact information links in the show notes. And if I could ask one favor, one call to action. If you could please recommend this episode, this podcast, to 2 friends, 2 colleagues, or 2 family members, you'd be doing me a huge solid, and I'd very much appreciate it. Well, folks, that brings us to an end of another conversation, another week. And I look forward to continuing this conversation with you next Monday, the next episode. Well, folks, until then, keep well, keep strong, and we'll speak soon.